How you doing?
Go to ways to walk into the class. That's bad. How was your presentation?
All right, welcome back. Shh. We are almost done, my friends. We are almost there. The light at the end of the tunnel's coming. It's an oncoming train. No, we're almost there. I always use that metaphor. Feels that way every semester. We're almost done. We have First Amendment today. On Monday, we are doing the travel ban, the Trump against Hawaii case. On Wednesday, we have no class. And then Monday, we're having a review session where I'll go over last semester's final exam, or at least part of it, as much as I can do before you guys go home for the night. Any questions before we get started? Anything on your minds about last class? All right, we'll move on. We do today the First Amendment. There is no way I can conceivably put this into a single class. It's a travesty. It kills me every year, but there's just not enough time. We run fast enough as it is. A couple of you, I think, are taking my First Amendment class in the spring. I don't know that I'll be teaching again while you're in law school. It's somewhat of a fluke that I got it. Hopefully I will, but if I don't teach it to you, you should take it for someone else. It's on the bar, but more importantly, I think it's an important aspect of being a citizen of the United States to understand the First Amendment. It's far too important to forget about. I'm sorry? I heard murmuring. Okay, I'll move on. Everything all right? Are you good? Okay, fine. Good. All right, so I don't have time for a poll question. That's too much stuff we have to do, so I'm going to jump right into it. I apologize. If you want a poll question, I'll ask you something later. The First Amendment is very few words, but it protects 5 or 6 major rights depending on how you count. It says, I'll read it in its entirety. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So one thing to stress at the outset, the Bill of Rights, as we call it today, doesn't actually give us rights. It doesn't grant us freedom. Just look how it's framed. It says Congress can't do this, and Congress can't do that, and Congress can't do that. The reason why it's written in this fashion is that at the time the frame was understood that these rights pre-existed our government, that we had these rights before the Constitution was written. Now, where these rights come from, maybe they came from the English common law, maybe they came from God. I'll leave that debate for another time. But the idea was these are pre-existing rights, and that much we can at least all agree on. The first one is what's called the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. And I assigned you a couple readings on that today. This provision, as it's understood today, is very different than what was understood in the 1790s. At the time of the founding, many states had established churches, right? They literally had official state religions. This is my opinion. I'm not over majority of this one, but I think the best reading of the Establishment Clause is that this was a limitation on congressional power. It says, Congress, you can't mess with state churches, and you can't establish a national church. In other words, let the states have whatever church they want. It was a federalism provision, right? You can't make any law respecting the state establishments of religion. If you accept that reading, then the entire separation of church and state is a myth. It's a nice principle that has no basis in the Constitution. The principle of separation of church and state only came around as Supreme Court doctrine in the 1950s. It's fairly novel. It's taken a hold for sure, and I think McCreary County illustrates it. But I think as an original matter, the best reading is that this simply said that Congress can't mess with state churches. And I think until the 1840s, some states still had established churches. Eventually that faded out, but it was like that initially. So that's the Establishment Clause. The second provision that says Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and the word thereof refers back to religion. This provision was designed to limit Congress from limiting people's exercise of religion. Now, what's religion? What is exercise? And what does it mean to prohibit? Right? These terms are not self-defining. And we'll hopefully do a little bit with the Smith and the Sherbert versus Werner case later today. The next provision, which we'll focus a lot of time today, is this free speech clause. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. You might read speech as one clause, press as the other. I don't really care which one. The court said they're pretty synonymous, but I do think they're two different provisions. What does that mean? No law. Does that mean Congress can't pass any law concerning speech? Very famously, Justice Hugo Black was a justice, a Roosevelt appointee, who was one of the first major textualists. He said, well, I read this mean no law. Any law restricting speech he thought was unconstitutional. But what does it mean to abridge the freedom of speech? Is there a difference between prohibit and restrict and abridge? One second. And what does speech mean? Does it refer only to spoken words, printed words, words you sing, artwork, paintings, code, burning a flag, burning a draft card? Right, what is speech? Yes, Marquis in the back.
Did you say that Justice Black said any law that infringes on freedom of speech is unconstitutional?
Yeah. Or whatever adjective. He thought any law that restricts speech was unconstitutional. I think I mentioned this earlier, but in the 60s, the Supreme Court heard a lot of obscenity cases about whether a pornographic film was obscene. And the justices would actually sit there and watch the movie in the Supreme Court basement. Creepy, I know. Justice Black refused to watch because all the movies were okay. So you can't ban any of the movies. You wouldn't even watch the movie. Or so the story goes. I've tried to figure out where this theater was. I think it's now like a little exhibition room for like exhibits at the court. But it's in the basement of the Supreme Court if you ever go there. At a projector, and I don't. I don't even want to think about it. It's weird. Okay. And then what is the press? Is it the printing press? Is it the media? Is it bloggers? Is it tweeters? Right? How far does press go? Lots of questions. I'll cover it next semester if you have the time. The next provision, the right of the people to peaceably assemble. You often hear the phrase freedom of association, that you can associate with whomever you wish. For example, that the government can't obtain the roles of private groups. But there's no association clause. There's one of assembly, that people can amass. But does that allow for riots? Can the police stop you from having these massive parades without a permit? And the last one doesn't get much air these days. It's the petition clause. Congress should make no law respecting the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Today we think of the only way to get a remedy is to perhaps vote or go to the courts. But in England, there's a different way. You would send a petition to the king with a grievance, like Festivus, right? And you hope that the king would perhaps grant your petition and give you what you wanted. This was a very common approach to changing government. In fact, Madison's memorial and remonstrance, which I had you read, was a petition to the government complaining about something that was going to be perhaps passed. So these are the 5 or 6 freedoms in the First Amendment. I will only have time to go over with you the Establishment Clause, the Free Exercise Clause, and the Speech Clause. That's all I have time for. Any questions about that at a high level? Yeah, Drew.
Just the last clause, that's the petition clause?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Drew.
The one before that, what would you call that?
The Assembly Clause.
Assembly clause, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Noel.
So the exam, the others are not fair game?
Oh, I don't know. I think they're not fair game. I'll make that concession. I'm not going to test you on the Assembly Clause, the Petition Clause. Does it make you feel better? Okay, fine. I narrowed out 2 clauses of the entire constitutional, the entire book, so I think it's not fair game. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. I don't know. All right, whatever, fine.
You did it.
No backsies, right?
Right. Take the words
No
off.
backsies, no backsies. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. So let's start with the speech clause. I wasn't going to do this, but a few of you asked. Last year I had my own free speech incident. I don't like talking about myself, but they demanded it, so I will make the request. It's okay. So as you know, I always have a suitcase with me, always going somewhere, and I often go to different law schools and lecture. See, people actually want to hear me. You guys have to. You have a choice, but most people will actually voluntarily come to see me. Oh, and by the way, again, Monday at 4, if you're around, Supreme Court roundup in the library at the 6th floor. So if you're here, Monday at 4, please come by and watch. It'll be fun. So last year, I was invited to give a lecture at the CUNY Law School in New York, City University of New York in Queens. And, you know, I'm from Staten Island. I think it was the week of Passover, so I was already going home. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come by. And the students asked me to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, which is free speech on campus. Okay. I didn't really think much of it. You know, I give maybe 40 of these lectures a year on different topics. Okay, whatever. So a couple days before the event, I get an email from the student that invited me, and he said that the students at CUNY are planning a protest of me. A protest. So at first I didn't believe them. I thought, you know, they're not going to protest. Who am I? I'm not important enough to protest. I was wrong. Not about the important part, but about the protest part. And I get to school, and I'm there waiting around. I get there a couple hours early, and then the school security guard comes over to me and says that about 40 or 50 people are assembly, in the hallway outside of my event. I'm like, huh. And then he tells me that they're making signs. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds nice, like arts and crafts, right? I said, okay, that's fine, whatever. He says, well, we have to talk about your security. I'm like, wait a minute, what? We have to talk about your security. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, what's your exit strategy? My what? Exit strategy? This is not Iraq. I mean, how are you going to basically exit the building? And I was like, oh. And they were actually concerned about my safety. And you've seen videos where speakers are physically attacked. I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to take an Uber. He's like, okay, good, you're not going on the subway. I'm like, oh. Oh, that's what you mean by that. Now, at that point, I'm like, okay, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't consider canceling the event, although maybe other people would have. They said, screw this, I don't need to go through this, gauntlet of whatever. So I'm going to play the video, and it's the only way to actually illustrate it. So here's the setup. I am coming down the hallway from the elevator, and I have my little flip camera with me, which I'm always bringing to all my events. And as I come around the hallway, the protesters greet me. Hopefully you guys can hear this. By the way, there's one sign, though, that I actually kind of agree with. Let me fast forward a bit. Your legal analysis is lazy and wrong. Concur. That one, conservative hate equals intellectual debate. So the gist of their protest, if I could try to summarize it, is that they oppose my mere presence in their school. They objected to me simply being there. Okay, and I'll go into a little bit more why in a minute. So I had never had this happen before, and I'm walking, I'm like, wow, that's something else. And I walk into the classroom. By the way, this guy tries blocking me, but I sort of just push him aside. Yeah. And the room's empty. Now, why? So at this point, the room's completely empty, and I had no idea. I thought, okay, that's fine. These guys are protesting outside. They'll stay outside. I'll do my thing inside, whatever. Okay. What I later found out, why the room was empty, is that there were students who would have otherwise wanted to hear me speak, who were afraid to be seen with me out of a fear that they would be shamed by their classmates.
What the heck did you do?
I'm wondering now. Who are we sitting in the presence of?
So their objection to me was from things I've written, right? Now, I don't like talking about myself. No, I talk all the time about myself, but I try not to make this class a podium, but I'm generally libertarian and conservative on a lot of social issues. I've written, for example, that DACA, though a good policy, is illegal. I said the travel ban, though a poor policy, was lawful. And they took a smattering of my writings about me, and they passed out these pamphlets about me to the entire school, calling me every name in the book. A racist, a sexist, a misogynist, a homophobe, a transphobe, an ableist. Ableist is disability. And a couple others, but there was an entire list of ists that I am. What?
Could you sue for like anything?
People always ask me that. I don't. They also call me a Nazi and a fascist. I think Nazi possibly, because that's actually a political party which I'm not a member of. Fascist a little bit more subjective. No, I've given this some thought. No, I don't want to sue them. I don't want to sue these kids. But they did call me a Nazi and a fascist. That one probably good. But my point is, they objected here because of words that I've said before, things I want to say. So then they came into the room, and they actually surrounded the entire perimeter of the classroom. And at this point, I'm like, what the hell's going on? But you got to stay cool, right? If you think this class gets contentious, my God, I can handle a lot worse, right? So you learn to just keep cool when this is going on and not react to them. Now let me fast forward just a little bit.
There are students that are.
I apologize for the shaky camera. It's Blair Witch, exactly, yeah. Yeah, the Josh Witch project, yeah. Anyway, someone fell in the back on a porn. So far, actually, so what happened? They protest outside. They're staying right behind me. I haven't actually said a word yet. I'm up there sort of just chilling. Yeah. I was improvising, my friends. I didn't know what to do. Okay.
I don't understand how CUNY allows this. I just don't understand. There are students that are directly affected by this.
So, I mean, it's hard to hear them, but I should have they can't do captions on this. But what they're effectively saying is that my writings, my speech on various legal issues actually harms the people in the room, and that I should not be welcome on their campus. And they react to that by trying to prevent me from speaking. The room's empty, by the way. There's no one in there with protesters. I'm basically by myself. So this is the guy trying to introduce me. Woo!
To discuss the topic of freedom of speech in the context of university. Professor Blackman has written numerous articles on numerous constitutional topics, and he's been giving this speech many times. And so,
These are law students.
Thank you very much.
Really did not like
They did arts and crafts. They actually passed that poster board in the hallway. They had markers and everything.
Yeah.
But they're day students.
Actually, a lot of these people are working students. A lot of people were actually, I was there about 5 o'clock at night. It was a night program.
Thank you for having me.
It's not white men and those who support white supremacy.
I'm not white. I'm not white.
Then white men support white supremacy.
There's an African American gentleman in the back who was actually there to see me.
It's interesting. It's not.
Yeah, not what you think.
Sorry, you're not supposed to interrupt the speaker once he starts.
All right, so I'll pause this a minute. So this goes on for a long time, right? And the gist is they're not letting me speak. They're not letting me say a word, okay? At this point, an administrator comes in and tries to settle them down.
Everybody stop. Let me tell you something. The university rules are people get to speak. You may protest. You may protest, but you may not keep anyone from speaking. If you do, I have other things to do. I will be back.
She never came back. And then there was no discipline given for any of these protests, students who protest.
Well, they didn't do anything.
Ah. So this is why I'm playing the video. This is precisely why I'm playing the video. When you have an invited speaker who comes to speak, and you interrupt him, is he able to speak? Can two people? What's my one rule in this class? You got to raise your hand before you say that, but yes. One person talks at a time, and you got to raise your hand. And I think that's a very easy rule. It's a fair rule. I can apply it neutrally, I think. But when you have heckling, right, when you're trying to shout someone down, you can't speak. Now, I want to ask you, all of you, if you were invited to give a speech somewhere, anywhere, doesn't matter, whatever you like, passion, talk about, you're invited. You go to some place and people are protesting you. Do you decide to go into the room? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Then they surround you, standing 6 inches over your shoulder, holding up signs, calling you all manner of names. Do you go ahead with your talk or not? Then you start, that's one time. Then you start speaking and they start shouting at you when you actually open your mouth. What do you do?
It looked like you went on because it's an hour and 12 minutes.
I'm not asking you what I would do. I know what I did. Right? I actually prepared for this sort of thing. I actually prepare for protests. I think about these things in advance. But for the... Oh, I do. I've taken public speaking lessons and dealing with protests in advance. I was actually, I'd never had before, but I was ready for this, which is why I look so cool up there. But if you're not ready for it, what? Well, I'll tell you something. I might look cool, but my hand's shaking. It was a little intimidating. All right, now it's our hands. You want to say something? Yeah.
Right. That's the same thing, like we kind of have been talking about that, right? So civil rights movements, or when we talk about gay, lesbian, or protests, I mean, or abortion. So that's kind of the nature of when there's something that is important to you that you want to talk about. You have to be prepared for that, and so you just continue on. So you say, like, what would you do?
And what if they don't let me speak? Every time my mouth starts screaming and shouting, and I can't speak over them.
You don't have to start screaming and shouting.
No, they do. They're screaming and shouting. How can I speak if I'm trying to illustrate a point right now? But how can I speak if someone's talking over you? How can I talk if someone's talking over you? See, you can't do it at all. See, there's no communication when you talk over someone. See, no one heard anything but we just said. You're a talented man. But only one person can talk at a time.
You didn't appreciate the irony of it?
Which part?
That they're holding up free speech signs and not allowing you to speak?
Well, the irony is that they weren't respecting free speech rights at all.
Right, that's my point.
Oh, very ironic, yeah. So I don't need to poll you or ask you, but just think about yourself, right? How would you handle this situation? Right? It's a legitimate question, right? I mean, I actually don't even know the legal answer myself. You asked me defamation, it's funny. I've given a lot of thought to this, and I still haven't made up my mind. In fact, I don't know if those kids should have been disciplined. I'm on the fence. I actually go back and forth. If I play the full video, you might change your mind. It gets worse. But I actually go back and forth about whether discipline was appropriate. I don't know, and I think about it a lot. Yeah, Mark, you?
I was going to say, you should have just turned it into like a town hall.
I did. That's what I did. So let me just fast forward a bit, okay? Let me just play a bit more. Let me just, because Marky asked a question, I'll play it.
I actually want to start by using the one legal argument you actually made. You said the violence exists in the law, and it's a myth that law is inherently neutral. Okay? You said there's a myth of legal objectivity. So let me talk about legal objectivity for a few minutes, right? Someone did some excellent opposition research. Whoever did this, I actually applaud you. You found about 7 or 8 bullets on various videos I've given over years. But I want to make a few points. For example, you wrote that I supported the president's decision to rescind DACA. Now let me tell you something. I actually support the DREAM Act. This might surprise you. I actually think the DREAM Act is a good piece of legislation. And we're a member.
By the way, gaslighting, you know what that term means?
Yes.
Gaslighting is when we try and distort someone's reality.
Oh, let me speak, please. And we're a member of Congress. I would vote for the DREAM Act. My position is that the policy itself was not consistent with the rule of law, which teaches a lesson, right? The lesson is this. You can support something as a matter of policy, but then find that the law doesn't permit it. And then the answer is to change the law.
Fuck the law.
You heard that?
I didn't hear it. Can you repeat? I'm joking.
You didn't hear it?
Fuck the law, right? That's a very good thing.
So after this, it gets better, right? I engaged them, I talked to them, and they could not handle it. The best they can come up with is fuck the law. You're welcome. Yeah, do I get a timeout for that? Yeah. Put a quarter in the swear jar. But the point is, they leave after this. The protesters actually leave. And I sat there for an hour, and I took every single question from the kids in attendance. They asked me at everything. Originalism, slavery, criminal justice, whatever. I took every question they had. I did not give the talk that I planned to give, but I stayed there till there was no more questions. Town hall. I mean, these were, you think you guys have tough questions? They didn't show any respect at all. They were just going at me one after the time. I say, please, one question at a time, but I can't enforce it like I can over here. So they leave, right? And they pull out, and they actually go to the deans to complain. Now, I'll give a highlight, then I'll summarize what's going on. There's one guy in the back. You can kind of see him. Oh, he's somewhere in the back. You can't see him. But he was holding up a sign saying that Josh Blackman is an oppressor. I'm an oppressor. And you might agree with me, or in final time, grading time. But he actually sent me an email. I gave him my card afterwards. I gave all these guys my cards. None of them ever talked to me ever again, but I gave him my card, whatever. And he sent me an email, and he said afterwards, I no longer have enough evidence to conclude that you're an oppressor. It is like the most law student answer ever. But the point why I mention this is if you actually stood around 5 minutes to hear me speak, you learned something, right? But if you sit there and try to shout me down and not let me say a word, you don't learn a damn thing. So as a basic principle, right, did they stop me from speaking? Well, maybe for 5 or 6 minutes they did. And whether does that warrant discipline? I actually go back and forth. I don't know. I truly go back and forth because I think had they done, imagine if you had Justice Ginsburg up there and protesters surrounded her and were just shouting over his shoulder, they'd be arrested. They'd be in jail in 5 seconds. Now, maybe I'm a big and tall guy, right? I'm strong. I couldn't handle anything. I'm a weakling, right? If they mobbed me, I'd be done, right? If they decided to assault me, I'd be toast. There was no one there to protect me.
Security didn't come up?
There was one guy in the back of the room. He would not have done a damn thing. He would not have done anything. Right. But security didn't clear out the room. They did not clear out the room. And they did nothing. So I don't give you this incident to, tell you what I think. I really don't frankly care if you know what I think or agree with me. It doesn't really matter to me. But this is an illustration of, I think, the first two free speech cases today. What value does speech that you find offensive have, right? Does the First Amendment protect speech that you find offensive? And we have these two cases, right? Snyder against Phelps and Mattel v. Tam. See, I was going to work this, I promise. Yeah. And both of these cases involve things that are, well, depending how you rank them, I don't want to rank them, but that are probably a lot worse things that I've said, right? You guys see enough about this? Yeah, let me just fast forward to the end.
One last thing. Professor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm a trained mixed martial artist. And
oh, boy.
CHL. Can you somebody travel with you?
I got my detail right here. Does your CHL work in New York, my friend?
No, it doesn't work.
Mine doesn't work there either, so it would not be helpful.
These work in New York. So.
They, well, I got my body. Okay. No. Yeah, no, my CHL's no good there. Doesn't work. But as you can see, the room is full at the end. Those were not the protesters. Those were like non-protesting students. And let me tell you, again, I took questions for a solid hour. Whatever hard questions you think you asked me, they came at me much harder because it was on things I didn't know anything about, like criminal justice and stuff. I try as hard as I can to answer their questions. I gave them an entire history of slavery. I did everything I could, same way I give to you guys. Oh, this is the guy with the Josh Blackman's the oppressor sign. He actually emailed me afterwards. This guy, like Andrew, I think his name was. No, it's a guy. It's a guy. His name was Andrew. Really nice guy. I mean, we chatted for a bit afterwards. But I want to just finish on this point. A number of students came up afterwards and actually said that they were ashamed to come into the room with me. They didn't want to see with me because they'd be shamed by their classmates. And they expressed a concern that, they were all conservative, the ones who talked to me, that their views are just not welcome on the campus. CUNY is a very progressive school. It's a public interest law school. That's like their mission. And they said that they, were afraid to articulate their political views and legal views that simply were outside the mainstream of that building. And they were grateful for my presence there because they just had never heard it before on their campus. So this is in no way a preach of anything, but it's always important to hear as many views as you can and not to shout down and interrupt, which is why I'm so stringent in this class that one person gets to talk at a time. I believe with this firmly. If you want to raise your hand and say something, I'm going to call on you every time. But you gotta do something respectful. All right? Okay. All right, so let's talk about Stevens. I'm sorry, not Stevens, Snyder. Stevens is the animal crush case, which I didn't assign, but it's in your book. That's the one where they crush little animals. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't assign that one, but it's in the book if you want to read it. And if you want to scroll through this blog post, I'll put the link in the class page. You can read the signs for close-ups. Yeah, the video is linked in that post I just sent to. If you're ever bored while you're driving home, you can listen to it. Yeah. The First Amendment is not a license to dehumanize marginalized people. There it is. Okay. Anti-DACA, not welcome. White supremacy. Oppressors are not welcome here. Oh, this guy's actually from Houston. I talked to him afterwards. He
flew all the way over there.
No, he's from Houston, but federal site is racist. Josh Blackman's racist. Actually, I kept their signs though. They left all their signs littered in the hallway, so I took them home with me up in my office, and I have one framed on my wall. I do. It says, "Go home and blog about how hard this was," and I did. I did. I did it. I did exactly. I blogged about it. It was basically. Yeah. No racism. Okay. Founded to uphold white supremacy. No.
It was founded to uphold white supremacy.
No, it wasn't. No, my existence is greater than your opinion. My free speech, oh, is fuck you. White supremacist.
Well, we know who made the comment now.
If your writes on your exam, you're in trouble. Okay. I can't. There's, this is Andrew.
I would have been afraid of Andrew in the back of the
I got Marcus helping me out. I'm good. All right. All right. And then I just trolled him at the end. All right. Yeah, Justin.
How much notice did they have before you spoke there?
About 2 or 3 days.
So they knew you for 2 to 3 days.
That was all about maybe 5 days. It was a couple days.
They weren't prepared.
They came prepared. They came prepared. I actually think that outside helped because they did a lot. They actually did opposition. They actually watched my YouTube videos and pulled out quotes out of context, things I've said. To like, I think that outside help. I'm pretty sure they did because this was a lot of work in 2 days for law students who should have been doing their homework, but and reading for class. Yeah.
Do you have a copy of the pamphlets?
Oh, I do. I got them all. I got all. Dude, I kept everything. I kept everything. This was. I found it hilarious. Anyway. Snyder versus Phelps. So let's actually go to different kinds of signs. That's a good segue. So yeah, I like that. So the facts in Snyder are like this. You have the Westboro Baptists, and these are, by any definition, awful people, right? They firmly believe that having gays in the military is going to result in the end of the world, and it's a mark of sinfulness. And that the way they express their faith is by protesting at funerals of primarily military members who were killed in service, but also celebrities and virtually anyone. And they're just trying to get attention for themselves. These are all people who are in the same family. They're all related. And there are kids they have holding up these signs. Yeah. Now, the facts in Snyder actually are important. So the Westboro Baptists, as perhaps wicked as they are not stupid. And they protest in a very specific fashion. Outside the cemetery. Now, most cemeteries are private property. If they tried to enter the cemetery, they'd be arrested for trespass. So instead, they protest on sidewalks outside the cemeteries. And let me tell you something else. They don't say a word. You can't tell this from the photographs, but they're quiet. They just sit there and hold their signs for a couple minutes and they leave. They're there long enough for the TV crews to pick them up, get their pictures taken, and they leave. So when Matthew Snyder, slain Marine, his funeral was held in Maryland when he was being buried, the protesters were outside. And in fact, the Snyder family never even saw it. They didn't learn about it until they watched the evening news. And they brought a lawsuit for our favorite tort, I always say it wrong, damn it. The intentional infliction of emotional distress, IIED. I never say it right, IIED. And they argue that their protest was unconstitutional. I'm sorry, violated the IIED tort. Now, did you do this case in torts? No, did you do the IIED in torts? So did you discuss the First Amendment when you covered that? So if you think about what IIED is, it's words, right? It's spoken conduct. It's some act that inflicts some sort of emotional distress. Now, this is not a battery, right? These protesters weren't harming them physically. They were engaging in conduct that caused emotional distress. Now, we can all agree, right? God forbid we ever have a funeral of a loved one and these people protesting outside. That's going to mess with you. That's going to cause deliberate distress and anguish at a time when you're so raw that you have to bury your son. I mean, this is the worst thing you could imagine in the world. But when you have a tort that's being enforced by the courts, you always have to think about the Constitution. And are there limits that the First Amendment places on funeral protests and whether they have a right to speak, even if it inflicts distress? Now, the upshot of the Phelps case is the vote. This was an 8-1 decision. There are a lot of areas on which the Supreme Court bitterly divides. Go look at our cases last week, right? It was 5-4 everything. But in recent years, the Supreme Court has been fairly unanimous, not always, but pretty close to unanimous on speech cases. Free speech is one of those areas where I think liberals and conservative judges alike tend to agree. And ultimately, the court found that the IIED tort could not proceed. Right? And the majority is written by Chief Justice Roberts. And again, I give Roberts a lot of crap, but the guy can write. This is a good opinion. Just legal writing, he knows how to write. And he explains that even though these signs are hateful, right, and odious and wicked, they relate. By the way, this is one of the kids holding up the sign with a little backpack. It's very sad. Is that a Spider-Man backpack? I think it might be. Oh my goodness, Optimus Prime, you're right. It's Transformers. There's more than meets the eye there. Yeah, sorry. But Justice Roberts makes a point that I think is important. These speeches, these signs are in matters of public concern. Right? The signs aren't about Matthew Snyder in particular. They're about war, the draft, the president, right? The Bible, and other national issues. So even though you have this personal moment of the funeral, the speech concerns matters of broad public concern. Right? Now, why does that matter? The Supreme Court has held that when you have speech on matters of public concern, it's of the highest level. And it demands the most rigid, the most strict judicial scrutiny. Now, I don't have time to go too far into scrutiny land, but the short answer is this. When you have restrictions on speech on the basis of their content, right? When you're regulating speech based on what people are saying, or what their opinion is. That's called a content-based restriction, and it's governed by what's called strict scrutiny. Now, strict scrutiny in speech land is not the same thing as strict scrutiny in due process, and it's not the same thing as strict scrutiny in equal protection. The same phrase, strict scrutiny, applies in different contexts and has different tests. I'm not going to bore you with it now, but just know that when you have a content-based restriction, you must satisfy the most stringent of strict scrutiny. Why? The government can't pick which message is right and which message is not permissible. And the court says, if there's a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable. And it cites a case called Texas against Johnson. This was a case in which Texas, always Texas, right? Texas tries to prosecute a guy for burning an American flag at the 1984 Republican National Convention in Dallas. And the Supreme Court reversed his conviction and said you cannot prosecute someone for burning a flag. That the act of burning a flag, though not saying words, conduct can be speech. And the government's censoring the speech based on its message. And when you censor speech based on a message, it's unconstitutional. Okay? So any questions on the Snyder majority? I'm lecturing more because I burned all my time watching the video. Any other questions on the Snyder majority? Yeah, sure, Maniqua.
You can't restrict certain events. Like, I I know they were, in this particular case, they were imposing any sort of danger because they had already checked with authorities. But, if like a funeral, something like a sacred event, you can't prevent people from, like, infringing upon that.
Where? Inside the cemetery or outside the cemetery?
Well, I know, like, inside, but they were still close enough to it.
They were, I think, about 100 meters away. I forget the exact distance, but they were some distance away. But let me answer your question a little bit differently, right? What if tomorrow, right, all 60 of us decide we're going to go take a parade down Main Street at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? We're going to go protest down Main Street, all 60 of us, right? Can we do that? We want to protest, I don't know, final exams, make final exams easier, I don't know, whatever, right? So the city, I'll get you a second to me, I promise. The city says, if you want to have a parade, you ask for a permit, right? You got to have maybe certain paperwork, you have to pay a fee, you have to have a plan of where you're going to go. The government can have neutral rules of who gets a permit, right? If you follow these rules, you get the permit. What they can't do is say, we'll give a permit to the Boy Scouts, but not the Girl Scouts, right? They can't choose which viewpoint gets it. As long as you follow the rules, you get your parade permit. Mia?
So is the time, place, and manner?
Oh, that's what I was getting at. I didn't say time, place, and manner, did I?
No.
So the government can regulate some sort of, okay, I'll do Mia's question, okay. So, no, it's fine. I'll do it now. So here, let me do it like this, right? When you have a content-based restriction, right? When you're restricting speech based on its content, the courts apply what's called strict scrutiny. And I'm not going to give you the test. Don't worry about it. Just take my word for it. I won't test you on more than that, okay? People stop writing immediately, right? But what if it's a content-neutral restriction, right? Where if you want a parade permit, right? You want a parade permit, the government can establish the time, place, and manner in which you speak, right? That will only grant parades for Sunday afternoon at 12 o'clock. That way you're not having a parade during rush hour when everyone's trying to get home from work, right? And the parade thing is content neutral. Now what happens if the Westboro Baptists decide they want to have a parade permit? Or the Ku Klux Klan? Or the neo-Nazis or the skinheads, they want a permit. And the courts have held that if you give a permit to one group, you give a permit to the other group. Now you can counter-protest the hell out of it. But if it's a content-neutral restriction, you only regulate where, when, and how they protest. Yeah?
Do you have an opinion on why the majority of the court didn't address the epic?
Oh, thank you for asking. I was going to have that with the Alito dissent in a minute. So let's talk about the epic, right? We didn't only have the protest at the funeral. There was also an epic. It's called as a blog post, right? Go home and blog what hard this was, right? It was a blog post. Now, while the signs they were holding were fairly generic, they were about the war and everything else. The epic, this blog post, was targeted directly at the Snyder family. And Alito, in his dissent, makes a really big deal about this. And the majority basically blows it off in a footnote. And the majority basically says, well, this is not really part of the record, right? This wasn't really appealed, so we're not going to consider it. And if you go back and listen to the arguments, they were very unsure about this. Let me give a lesson for lawyering. If you do not preserve an issue for appeal, it is waived. The easiest way to lose a case at a higher court, like the Supreme Court, is by not preserving your arguments. So here, I think the lawyers just screwed up. Again, I don't know because I haven't studied the record carefully, but my tentative conclusion is that this might have been legal error. I don't know that would have made a difference. I think even with the epic, you can write a very mean blog post about someone, right? We're all on social media, aren't we? Right? And if the state starts permitting IED torts based on your Facebook post, I think we're all in trouble. I think that would be a bad idea. Yeah.
But couldn't something like that be brought in like a totality of the circumstances concept, where you have, because that's kind of what was it, Alito? He kind of brought it together. I don't think he said like this alone qualifies it for IED. I think he kind of said it's this plus the action.
Yeah. Do you think that would have made a difference for the majority if they had actually considered it? I mean, their opinion's easier by not considering it. But had they considered it, do you think it would have made a difference?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I don't think it would make a difference one way or the other. It makes it easy just to exclude it, but I don't think it would make a difference to the outcome of the case. And again, if we start taking this seriously, that mean blog post, right, which are not actually at the funeral, right? And again, I think there's a difference, right, between having the protesters at the funeral versus a blog post you can read the night, anytime you want. I think the closeness and time and proximity to the funeral is different than people just putting crap on the web, right? I mean, again, the notion that someone can look at your Facebook pages and see the burns you send and use that as a way for IID, it makes me a little nervous. Yeah.
Does Phelps represent himself in these cases?
Thank you so much for asking that question. His daughter's a lawyer.
Oh, he is too, right? They're all lawyers?
Yeah. Margie Phelps argued it, and she's Fred Phelps' daughter. She was terrible. I actually think she was better than Chuck Rosenthal or the Lawrence County Harris DA. Right? I think she's actually better than Chuck Rosenthal, but she was pretty bad. But I mean, I think she would have been better served by having a different lawyer. But that's where she was. She won 8-1. I mean, that shows you can be a really lousy lawyer and still win your case 8-1. By the way, I always show this video. I was actually at the court the night before Snyder v. Phelps was decided, and I was just walking down the street by the Supreme Court, and I saw this family. Let me just play this clip for a minute.
They look like zombies.
Just for a minute.
This is Josh Blackman. I'm actually staying outside the United States Supreme Court on the evening before argument.
This is me, 2009.
Phelps, and I'm with. So, what's your name?
Orlando Bethel. E-S-O-E-T-H-E-L.
Orlando, and you're wearing a shirt that God hates Muslims. Why are you wearing that shirt?
I'm wearing the shirt because it's a biblical truth. Jesus said.
Okay, and you get the rest, right? And he was there with his wife and kids, right? I think they were from Alabama. I'm not sure. I can't recall. If you watch the video, it's in there.
We hates together.
So again, I don't play this video because I want to show you these views, but these people exist, and the court is fairly persuaded that these views are to be protected. All right. Any questions on next case? A little bit easier. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Next, any questions on Snyder? Yeah, Clay.
Alito, I thought the unique events argument was pretty interesting.
Funerals are unique?
Yeah.
Right, and so this is an issue with the First Amendment, right? Where do you draw a line? Can you draw a line at a funeral, because that's such a unique event? Maybe draw the line at an American flag. You can burn anything else but an American flag, right? And the court has basically rejected any line drawing, because if you draw a line here, why don't you include this? Which is why generally my philosophy is I let all speech in. If I start picking and choosing which speech is good, which is bad, I'm going to be inconsistent somewhere. And instead of risking being inconsistent, you just let in lots of crap. And you have to listen to the crap you might like this guy over here with his kids, and then you throw out the rest. Maybe you find some good stuff somewhere along the line. All right. Any questions then on Snyder? Important case, very, very important case. I remember it was decided, it was a huge deal. And this was also in 2010 or so. So closer in time to the Iraq War. It was a much more raw issue than it is now 8 or 9 years later. Yeah, I think I was clerking. My first year of clerking this case was argued. I was at the court that night just walking around taking pictures. And these guys were right there by the court sign. By the way, if a reporter ever asks your name, always spell it. It's because I make sure they spell your name right in the newspaper. You have to hear that much right. Blackman. Anyway. All right, go on. All right, the next case, move on, is Mattal v. Tam. This is a very recent case. Was it 2017? Was anyone here when the slants came to South Texas? They came here. So they came here, yeah. So Simon Tam is the front man of this band. I think I don't remember. I don't. Is there a caption? I'm not sure which. I don't remember which one he is. But he came here to South Texas, and this guy's a character. He actually emailed me and said, "Josh, we want to come to South Texas." I'm like, "That's great." He's like, "We want to do a concert." I'm like, "That's awesome." Then in the 5th email, was like, "It'll be like $5,000." I'm like, "No way, go away." But then he emailed another professor. I won't say who. And that professor went to the dean and asked for the money. He got the money. I'm like, okay. So he came to South Texas to do a concert. But his band didn't make it. It's the most banned thing ever. Their bus broke down in Dallas, right? It's like the most rock band thing ever. The tour bus broke down as a van. Their van broke down in Dallas. So he like flew here by himself and gave a lecture. But a very fascinating guy. His band was called the Slants. Okay? Now, he didn't think that term was offensive. I actually talked to him about this a bit. And he explained that, by the way, this guy is extremely liberal, right? He's not some sort of right-wing ideologue, right? He believed that by using this word, slants, you can reclaim it and take it away from people who use it in a hateful fashion. He believed this firmly. Whether you agree or not, I don't care. But he believed this firmly. So he named his band this name. And then he registered for a trademark from the government. Now, why do you get a trademark? Money, right? When you have a trademark, that means no one else can use that brand name, right? If you have your merchandise, your T-shirts, your CDs, whatever, people can't rip off your brand name. So the irony of this case is, by winning this case, he limited other people's speech. Because now if I put a T-shirt on that says slants, he can sue me. Right? So the irony of this case is he actually restricted everyone else's speech but his. He got a monopoly on this word, the slants. Right? So much for reclaim, whatever. But that's not important, right? But there was a provision of trademark law, which I don't expect you to know anything about. But if you want to register a slogan or a brand name, you have to go to the trademark office. And they determined that his trademark is disparaging. Disparaging. The slants. And he told me this, I thought it was pretty funny. He said, had they figured out it was disparaging, they looked on Urban Dictionary, and they looked on some comments on some blog, and that people said they were offended. Now, I don't doubt people were offended by the name. I have no doubt. It's unquestionably true. But the question is, can the government deny you this license? It's valuable. This is worth a lot of money. Can the government deny you this trademark because people may find it offensive or disparaging? And here again, the court finds that they can't, right? Now, the opinion was fairly split, and I think at this point, Scalia had already passed away. I don't think Gorsuch was on the court yet. So I think this was the shorthanded court, which is why they sort of split a bit. But the controlling opinion, I don't know which one's controlling, but the Kennedy opinion argued that this is viewpoint discrimination, right? And the Alito opinion also argued that it was unconstitutional on slightly different grounds, right? So I'll start with the Alito one, right? Alito says this is content-based restriction, right? And when you have a content-based restriction, you apply what's effectively strict scrutiny, right? This isn't the government speaking, this is Simon Tam speaking with his own brand name. And you can't stop him from using this. And again, it's strange because no one's saying you can't use the word the slant, he's seeking a government license to profit off of that. So it was the facts are a little bit weird. It's not the rah-rah civil libertarian case, but it sits there enough. The Kennedy opinion, though, finds this a form of viewpoint discrimination, right? Where certain types of offensive messages were permitted, but other types were not. Now, one of the biggest cases at the time was actually the Washington Redskins case. And a lot of Native people find that name pretty offensive. The court took this case and not the Redskins case for a very obvious reason. This is a much more sympathetic plaintiff. But by virtue of Simon Tam winning his case, the Redskins prevailed. Okay? But the upshot here is that you can't censor offensive ideas, and you can't restrict speech based on its viewpoint, right? You can't pick, well, you can have unoffensive speech or not offensive speech. You have to have neutral principles. Okay? All right, an hour on First Amendment free speech. It's embarrassing. That's all I got for you. Any questions on Mattel v. Tam? I'm lecturing more than usual because it's too much. Oh, yeah, in the back. Yeah, Dana. You can't censor on the basis of its content, and you can't restrict certain viewpoints, right? You can't say this viewpoint's okay and that viewpoint's either. People can have opinions on either side of the fence. So imagine the government says, you can have speech promoting this political party, but not that political party. That'd be a viewpoint discrimination, and that's not permissible. As you can tell, your free speech chapter has a lot of cases. If you want to just flip through them, you're welcome to. But I'll just briefly summarize some of the other doctrines, one of which is conduct speech. Right? If I burn a flag in a protest, if I burn a draft card as a symbol of protest, if I burn a cross, right, to send a message, racism, whatever else, are those acts of protected speech? In each case, the answer is yes, right? Even though they're protected speech, right, can the government still restrict them? Complicated. The draft card, fine. So the court said with the, yeah, no, I'll do it. The court said with the draft card in a case called O'Brien that because they needed these cards to operate the selective service, it was actually a mutilation of a record. There's a good reason why you could ban burning them. That question is still good law. The American flag in the case called Texas against Johnson, the court said that you cannot ban the burning of a flag. The cross-burning one, there actually are two cases. One, RIV versus St. Paul. And the RIV case was actually a statute that the courts declared unconstitutional because it prohibited the cross-burning in specific content of viewpoints. There's another one called Virginia versus Black, which said that you can burn cross-burning if you have the correct intent, the correct mens rea. So it requires a heightened scrutiny or heightened standard to prove. I don't have time to go into either of those cases, but there's a lot of stuff on burning. Flags, draft cards, crosses. I have an entire chapter on the book if you want to read through them.
So that's burning, but what about like Kaepernick with the kneeling? That would become, that's conduct. So what is it? Are there like any, clearly not cases on point yet, but anything that would be close to like a precedent?
Well, let's just put in the government context, right? People in the NFL are not regulated by the government, it's regulated by a league. So the league can do just about anything it wants. But let's say a high school student kneels at the anthem. So generally, if any of your teachers, you know this, generally students surrender most of their constitutional rights. Not all of them, but a lot of them. For example, you can search a student's locker without getting a search warrant. If a student speaks up in class and causes a disruption, you can tell them to shut up. Right? Usually the government can't do that. I'd never do the interview. I love you all too much. But in general, a teacher can discipline a student if they act out in class. The test is whether their speech causes a substantial disruption. Right? That's the major test. It's called Tinker. You had a student back in the 70s wearing a black armband to protest the Vietnam War. And she wore this to class in Des Moines, Iowa. And the court held that she does not surrender her free speech rights at the schoolhouse gates. Very famous quote. So to the extent that a kneeling or something of that nature causes a substantial disruption, then the school could punish it. Now, generally, I don't think it would. I think it probably wouldn't disrupt. I don't know if there have been any cases that have been litigated. I'm sure there have been instances where students have been suspended for taking a knee. The classic case, of course, is a Pledge of Allegiance, a case called West Virginia versus Barnett, where you had a Jehovah's Witness student, and it goes against their faith to salute anything. It's a graven image. So they will not. By the way, it wasn't just reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. It was actually raising your right hand. It was very Naziist, right? That was a tradition back then. You'd raise your right hand at the flag. And the Supreme Court said that you can't force a student to salute the flag. Yeah. And Justice Jackson had a very famous quote. He said, if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it's that no man can be forced to say a message he doesn't agree with. And that's called the compelled speech doctrine. Right? God, I can go for hours.
Oh, it's off topic. It was just like, because you said that, but like when I was teaching my student, I'm not from Texas, but they would do that during the Texas pledge. They raise their right hand. I'm like, is that
like this or like this?
Well, not like a
No, I'm saying, no, like this. This is what they did. It wasn't like this. Okay. It was like this. You see a difference?
In general, like the fact that we pledged to Texas at all, but the fact that we had our right hands, I was kind of like.
Well, I'm okay with this, but I'm saying it was this. That's what they were doing in West Virginia. It was this, not this, this. Lord help anyone who fast forward this video without audio on. Yeah, Jesse. Was that? Yeah.
There actually is a case, and I don't know where it's at now, but there was a case of a girl, she's 17 or 18, in school, and she got expelled in Cyprus for not standing for either the pledge or something, and they ended up expelling her, but it's being litigated.
It should be. Yeah.
But I don't remember, I don't know where it's at.
Guys, one time. Yeah, I mean, if you're a school administrator and you're expelling someone for not doing the pledge, you're probably going to get sued real quick.
So I think they were
Guys, just one at a time. Yeah.
They're refusing to give her her diploma, I think, was part of it too. So she's suing based on a civil rights violation as well.
Yeah, she should probably win. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then also with that case, they were in order to give her her diploma, they were saying that she had to go to like a boot camp or it was some. It's Cyprus, so.
I don't know Cyprus. I'll let that one go. Okay. I'll take your word for it. I'll take your word for it. I think I've been to Cyprus. I don't even know. Clay.
I'll be quick. So fair to say that Alito may not fully have changed their mind. Maybe more narrow in TAM, but
I
their mind, Snyder versus.
Well, I think okay. So the question was comparing Alito and Snyder and TAM. I think to the extent that funerals are unique, that maybe has a very special place in his heart. Whereas with this slant, it's a trademark, or it's not as big of a deal. I don't think anything is as important. But again, all the justices agreed that the disparagement clause is unconstitutional. They all agreed on that point. Okay. Any other questions on free speech? Seriously, I could teach an entire class on the free speech clause. It's for days about violent video games and campaign finance and I mean, it's such a wide range of cases. So many good cases. All right, I'll move on. So we have an hour left. We'll focus on the other two aspects of the First Amendment for today, which are the free exercise clause and the establishment clause. Now, Danny, I think you said something I like the way you put it the other day. You said it's a freedom of religion and a freedom from religion. Did I get that right? Yes. I remember. I pay attention. And you have these two provisions, right? And there's a tension, right? There's a tension. And for now, I'm just going to assume that the establishment clause actually limits establishment of religion. I'm just going to assume that. I don't think it's correct, but I'll assume that for now. So you have these two provisions, right? One says that government can't prohibit you from exercising your religion. And the other one says that they can't establish religion. So they have to protect you when you're exercising it, but they can't take steps that establish it. This sort of conflict is not new. It was known for a long time. And I gave you in your reading a writing by James Madison, very famous, called The Memorial and Remonstrance. And it's a little bit hard to read. I apologize. It's not as lucid as I'd like. But it involves a proposal that would have forced Virginians to pay a tax in support of religion. Now, they could choose which religion they want to support, or they can instead send it to a seminary of learning, which is basically like a college or something. But they were required to pay this. And ultimately, the proposal was defeated, right? And instead, Virginia adopted a very famous bill called, by Thomas Jefferson, called the Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom. But Madison gave a very robust defense of conscience and explained that people can't be forced to do things that might violate their conscience. Right? Now, is that talking about free exercise, or is that saying that the government can't establish religion? You can probably look at it either way. Right? One is the state can't force you to pick a church, and the second one is the state can't force you to pick a religion that you may not agree with. So there's always these two provisions in tension. And as this case law has developed over the last, 200 odd years, we're at a point now where the court's often grappling with how these provisions interact. The first clause is the free exercise clause, which we already discussed when we did Bernie v. Flores, the RFRA case with Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. So let's start with Sherbert versus Werner. So the facts in Sherbert are like this. You had Adele Sherbert, who was a Seventh-day Adventist. They celebrate their Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday. They're called Sabbatarians. Okay. Sherbert had worked for the same factory for a number of years. And at some point, they changed her schedule around. And they said, you got to come in for work on a Saturday, which was, again, was her Sabbath, and she didn't want to work that day. She was then fired from her job. Okay. Now, there's no allegation here that they couldn't fire her, right? You think, well, man, you can't fire someone for religion. This was the 60s, very different place. They didn't have the same sort of employment discrimination provisions. So then she applied for unemployment benefits from the state. And the state found that she was not eligible. Why? Because she was offered suitable work, and then she declined to accept it. So this goes to the Supreme Court, and the majority opinion was by Justice Brennan. And Justice Brennan articulates a test, or not exactly a test, but what came to be a test called the Sherbert test. He didn't actually call it a test, but this is Brennan, right? You know Brennan. He doesn't actually say it. He sort of just like hints at things, and he cleans it up in some opinion a couple years later. But he first asked, does the South Carolina unemployment statute impose a burden on her free exercise of religion? And here the court says it does. Because it forces her to choose between following the precepts of her faith, on the one hand, and getting the job and benefits on the other hand. And the court says that no one should be put to that kind of choice to pick which one they want. Now, Brennan doesn't say the mere fact, he doesn't say that's automatically unconstitutional, right? The government can burden religion if, right, they have a really good interest, what's called a compelling interest, to justify that infringement. My friend, another kind of strict scrutiny, right? You have strict scrutiny in due process. You have strict scrutiny in equal protection. You have strict scrutiny in free speech. You got strict scrutiny in free exercise. And guess what? You get it in Establishment Clause also, right? You get it everywhere. And they're all different tests. Welcome to my world. But the court says you can't give rational basis review. You have to demand a compelling state interest, right? Now, why did South Carolina have this policy? They said, well, if someone applies for benefits and they have an ability to work, we're going to deny it. Why? We want to prevent fraud. Well, wait a minute. Can't you just, figure out if this is actually a legitimate objection or they're just making crap up? Well, you can, but that's extra work for us. So generally, under a rational basis review, you say, fine. If this is more efficient, you can do it. But think of Frontiera, right? This is with the Air Force officer who her husband was denied the spousal benefits, and they did it to prevent fraud. The court says, no. If you can still protect gender equality by hiring another person to investigate fraud, then you get the benefits out equally. Same here. If the state could do a little bit extra work and figure out if this was a religious objection or just BS, they should do it. So here, preventing fraudulent claims is not compelling enough of a state interest. And then Justice Brennan adds a third element to the Sherbert test, what's called the least restrictive means. The least restrictive means. This is very similar to what we call narrow tailoring, right? That if your goal is to prevent fraud, you have to have the most narrowly tailored way so as not to impose any extra burdens on religion, right? Can you police against fraud without burdening religion? Sure you can, right? Investigate. Say, okay, you're not working because it's your Sabbath. Okay, approved, check, right? So this effectively, the Sherbert test applies what can only be described as strict scrutiny to free exercise cases. That when the government imposes a substantial burden on the free exercise of religion. The state has to show they have a compelling interest, and they're using the least restrictive means to get there. Let me say that again. When the government imposes a substantial burden on your free exercise, the government has to show that they have a compelling state interest, and they're using the least restrictive means to get there. It's very similar to strict scrutiny that we discussed before, but just with different words. But the concept is much the same. I'm sorry? Yep. Okay. All right, so any questions on the Sherbert test? I lecture more. I need these cough drops. Okay. All right, so Sherbert was the test for some time. It's unclear how consistently it was applied. And the reason why is this. The Sherbert test allows the courts to carve out exceptions to general statutes, right? South Carolina did not enact this law to harm Sabbatarians. It wasn't. It was a general law, what's called a law of general applicability, that applied to everyone. And here the court could just carve out an exception because it happened to impose a burden on a free exercise. The next case, Employment Division versus Smith, changed that direction. The crux of Smith was something different. It involved the denial of benefits, but also involved criminal law. So this is Al Smith. He was a Native American. And as part of his religious rituals, he used peyote. Anyone ever know what that is? Right? If you've used it, I don't want to know. Actually, I had one student who was Native American who had, no, he was in one of these ceremonies. It's a hallucinogenic cactus, right? Apparently, it's not a good trip from what I hear. I've never tried it. It's very bitter. It upsets your stomach. This is not a recreational drug, so I'm trying to get at, right? This is not something people take for fun. This is a very serious narcotic. But it's a controlled substance, illegal under state law and federal law. Smith was working as a drug counselor, of all things, right? He was, don't laugh, he was a recovering alcoholic and abuser, and he actually became sober through his native faith. It's actually, I think, a good story. But he did this ritual with the peyote. He was fired from his job. Again, I mean, I can understand his boss. You can't be a drug counselor using drugs. Obviously, let him go. Then Smith and one of his colleagues applied for unemployment benefits. The state of Oregon denied it. And the reason why is that the Oregon law said you can't claim benefits if you were discharged for breaking the law or for doing something illegal, to be precise. I don't think he was ever charged with using drugs, but he was discharged for using these products. So he said, aha, I'm going to sue, right? And I'm going to sue on the same grounds that Mrs. Adele Sherbert did. That we have a law of general applicability. It imposes a burden on religion. And it's not the least restrictive means, right? The government can make an exception for peyote users, not some recreational drugs. You know, people aren't abusing it. It's a serious religious ritual. The case came out differently. And this is an opinion that I think may be on the chopping block. I would not be surprised if in the near future this case was reversed. It was very controversial for the time, but you know, we'll see. You guys graduate, you don't care, but I'll be teaching this for years to come. But Scalia wrote the opinion. I think he was very fond of it. I think now that he's gone, the court may indeed reverse this decision. But we'll talk about it for a bit. So first off, the court seems to disagree with the Sherbert test, right? They vigorously suggest that, oh, this was never really the test. And he might be right. The court never consistently applied it, but it was definitely a test for sure. And what Justice Scalia said is that courts should not be in the business of carving out exceptions for laws that are generally applicable, right? Generally applicable. What does that mean? The Oregon employment statute applies equally to all people, right? It's not like they enacted the law saying, we got it. We're going to punish these Native Americans who use peyote. That wasn't the case, right? It's a neutral law. It's general. There's no claim that there was any animus or bias towards natives, right? And what Justice Scalia says is so long as you have a generally applicable law, you give it what's rational basis review. I'm grossly summarizing, but that's the upshot, right? If you have a generally applicable law, you afford it only rational basis review. Does the government have a, one second, Noel. The government has a rational basis to restrict access to narcotics for people on unemployment? Sure. That's good enough, right? Critically, Scalia draws a distinction between Sherbert and Smith, right? In Sherbert, no one argued that that honoring the Sabbath on a Saturday was a crime, right? We're all free to honor the Sabbath whenever we want or never at all. In contrast, Smith's conduct was criminal in nature in both state and federal law. And he distinguishes, I think does make an important distinction. But in any event, he minimizes significantly the Sherbert test. In fact, he says we're no longer going to abide by the Sherbert test. Noel?
So how is it a neutral law if it's mostly Native Americans that use it?
Well, it would apply to someone getting fired for cocaine or the Church of Marijuana or anything else, right? Now Noel's question, though, is the effect will perhaps disproportionately fall on one faith, right? There is a Church of Marijuana, and I think it's referenced somewhere in the opinion, but put that aside for now, right? What Scalia says is the law itself was not drafted with an improper intent or an animus towards this group. The effect may burden this group, but it was not designed in that fashion. I'll contrast that with another case, which I didn't assign, but it's in your book, called Church of the, I'm going to spell this wrong, Lukumi Babalu Aye versus Hialeah. If anyone check my spelling, I think I'm in the ballpark. Okay? This was a different case. I didn't assign it, but I'll summarize it for you briefly. So you have the Santeria faith. Everyone know what this is? It's an Afro-Caribbean religion. Okay? You are?
No, I'm not.
You're pointing at yourself. I don't know. You're Jewish? Me too. Good job. My body is going to follow me around. I'm going to Columbia tomorrow. You want to come with me?
Yes. I've been to Columbia. I live there.
Columbia University?
No, in Columbia.
I'm going to Manhattan, man. I don't know where you're going.
So you really need someone to take you.
And I'm not going to Columbia. No, too dangerous. I was in the Avianca Lounge the other day, though, in Miami Airport, but that goes to Columbia. Anyway, but this case involved the Santeria faith. And one of the aspects of the Santeria religion is animal sacrifice. Okay? They take chickens, goats, different animals, and they slice the neck, and there's blood, and you can Google it, right? I'm queasy, so just Google it, right? This was in the city in Florida. And the city found out that the Santeria are opening up a church inside their city. And they freak out. They panic. And they hold this emergency meeting. And they pass an ordinance. I'm summarizing a lot, but the ordinance basically says you can't kill animals unless they're intended to be used for food inside city limits. Now, on its face, that looks a lot like a neutral statute. But the court looked at the history in which a statute was enacted and found that it was targeted against one religion and one religion only, which was Santeria. And they actually declared under the Smith test, right? Smith didn't apply. Because it was not a rule of general applicability, it was not rational basis, therefore it gets strict scrutiny. So the sort of Sherbert test still exists for laws that are targeted at one faith. Right, where it's not a rule of applicability, right? So the rule of the Smith test with generally applicable is rational basis. But if it's not generally applicable, you give it strict scrutiny. One second. So you still have this sort of rigid scrutiny, but you have to have evidence of an improper purpose behind the statute. And actually, I recently listened to the arguments in Lukumi, which I'd never done. I think the case was closer than I thought it was. But I do think it probably came out the right way. Yeah?
So it's like a rebuttable.
Yes. If you can show the law is generally applicable, you're stuck in rational basis world. But if you can show that it's not generally applicable, it only targets one religion, then you go to strict scrutiny into the Sherber test. Right? Did that answer your question, Noel?
Yeah.
So Smith is still good law, and Lukumi is still good law. Right? But that's not the entire picture. I think I already gave this history. I'll give it to you again. After Smith was decided, there was a huge backlashing. Oh my God, this is terrible, right? And Congress passes RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Why is it called restoration? It was trying to restore the Sherber test, right? It was trying to bring back the sort of heightened scrutiny that Justice Brennan wrote about in the Seventh-day Adventist case. Okay? And what RFRA says, and again I'm paraphrasing, is that if there is a law that imposes a substantial burden on religious exercise, the government must show that they're using the least restrictive means to achieve a compelling governmental interest. Right? So it effectively says, even though the Supreme Court said no more strict scrutiny for generally applicable laws, Congress, we're saying you get strict scrutiny for generally applicable laws. Sherbet for everyone, right? Ice cream and sherbet, right? Right? But as we know, in Bernie v. City of Bernie v. Flores, right? This is our Section 5 case we did like 2 months ago. Remember that? The Supreme Court held that RFRA was unconstitutional as applied to the federal government. That it was the Supreme Court in Smith and not Congress that gets to decide the meaning of the Free Exercise Clause. The court held that Congress tried to redefine the Free Exercise Clause, and they could not do that. In Bernie, the court held that the court and not Congress can redefine the Free Exercise Clause. The court said in Smith, you only get rational basis review. That's all you get. Congress can't go above and beyond the rational basis tests. You okay? Earring fell out. Oh. Yeah, Clay.
They can't define.
They can't redefine, right? If the court spoke on an issue, then Congress needs to back off. They can't change the meaning. Now, we discussed this case as well. I don't think that case is correct in a lot of reasons, but it was an act of judicial supremacy of the same sort you saw in Cooper against Aaron, right? That only the courts can say what the law is. And those who like judicial supremacy have to accept, I think, Bernie. Even where Congress wants to provide heightened protection, the court says you can't do that. Now, RFRA only was declared unconstitutional as applied to the states, right? Congress can't redefine the 14th Amendment for the states, right? Because it's incorporation, right? The 14th Amendment incorporates the Free Exercise Clause. So it's actually under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. That's how it works. Go back and watch the Bernie video again if you don't understand this. It's online somewhere. Oh, our last recording date's on Saturday. We're almost done. We get 10 hours more. We're almost done with this for the entire topic. But RFRA is still in the books for the federal government. There's another book in your case. There's another case in your book involving RFRA, which is the Hobby Lobby decision, right? This is a law that concerned the Affordable Care Act about whether the federal government could force certain religious employers to pay for the contraceptive care for their workers. Again, I didn't assign it, but it's in your book. You can read it if you like. The long and short of that case is this. The court found that making a company pay for contraceptives was, in fact, a substantial burden on religion. And because there were other means by which the government can ensure access to contraceptive care, pay for it yourselves by the government, then you can't force one to pay for it. One of the big issues there was whether a corporation was considered a person for purpose of the Establishment Clause, and the court said that they were. There's actually something called the Dictionary Act 1, U.S. Code 1, the very first section, which defines a person to include a corporation. So it wasn't that hard of a question, but the court did split on that, 7-2. 7-2 in the corporation question, 5-4 in the burden question. So RFRA still exists today. If there's any federal law that imposes a burden, you still have to go through strict scrutiny on religion. Yeah, Mia?
So is it on, like, the Hobby Lobby, is it that it was unconstitutional? Or is it that it violated RFRA?
It violated the statute, right? Yeah, I mean...
The sovereign sovereign immunity standard.
Right, but you're suing the feds, and the feds can waive their own immunity. Right.
That's what it was.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so again, Hobby Lobby's in your book. It's not really a constitutional decision. I'm on the fence whether even keep in the book, but I think it's a good illustration of how RFRA operates. And in fact, there was another case, God, I'm giving the entire, I'm lecturing today because there's too much material to cover. Another case called Ocentro, which involved a, it was a Brazilian Indian group called the, I can't remember, but their tea was called Huasca. You know what this is? It's a hallucinogenic tea. And they sought to import this Huasca, I think from Brazil. And was it? Ayahuasca. How do you pronounce it? Ayahuasca. Thank you for telling I didn't know. So, again, this is not a pleasant drug. This is not something you take for fun, right? And the government said you can't import this, and they actually got an exception for this one group to import this one type of a hallucinogenic tea. Ayahuasca, is that how you say it? Okay, thank you. You learn something new every day. All right, and so that's Ocentro. All right, so RFRA's still in the books. Okay. What else? Okay, any questions on free exercise? Sorry, I'm going way too fast. I want to make sure I get through everything today. You guys don't like my lecture, huh? Not fun.
Question.
Maybe you do, I don't know. Yeah, Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, so everything we went through just now with the rational test, the Sherbert test, and the Sherbert test, that's all based testing infringement on free exercise.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any tests for the establishment?
I didn't get there yet.
Okay.
That's my last 20-something minutes of class.
Gotcha.
After the establishment class in 20 minutes, it's embarrassing. Yeah, Yarn.
You lost me a little bit.
Uh-oh, sorry.
I thought you said that Bernie V. Flores said that the court cannot redefine.
As applied to the 14th Amendment in the states.
Okay.
Right, so let me do this again. I don't think I did this clearly enough. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment includes a due process clause, which is that no state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And one of those liberties is the free exercise clause. That's the incorporation doctrine. What the court said is that Congress, under their Section 5 powers, can't reinterpret the due process clause as applied to the states, but Congress can limit itself, right? If Congress wants to limit its own powers, they can do this, right? So if the federal government says, if we burn religion, we have to show strict scrutiny, Congress can do that for itself. That's a distinction. Again, if this doesn't make sense, just rewatch the Bernie video. I have a very nice animation which explains all of this. It's one of the hard. I think Bernie's the hardest case to teach, and I've actually talked. So Judge Jeff Sutton, who argued the case on the Sixth Circuit, I told him this is the hardest case to teach because it involves free exercise, it involves Section 5, it involves sovereign immunity, it involves like every legal issue in one. Judicial supremacy. It's a meaty case. Wrong, I think, but a meaty case. Jeff disagrees with me on that one. He argued it. Okay. All right. Any other questions on Sherbert or Smith or on free exercise? Oh, God, I wish I had an entire. If you take me again next term, we'll do this for a girl. Even if you're not in my class next semester, you can watch the videos, and you'll. I know you're all eager to stick around with me for another semester.
Where did you remember all this for your test?
Yeah. I actually have some of my property students had me for property 1 and property 2. It took me a third time voluntarily. It's shocking, but yeah, fools. All right, let's move on. So the last provision of the First Amendment that I want to talk about today is the Establishment Clause. And this is one of the provisions on which there is the most disagreement on the court. There is a fairly general agreement on free speech. There's also a fairly general agreement on free exercise. That if there's a law that targets one religion, just about everyone agrees that the government should create an exemption. Hobby Lobby is a different issue because it involves a corporation, but as a general matter, there's a fairly broad issue, a fairly broad agreement on free speech and free exercise. There's not on Establishment Clause at all, not even close. In fact, the justices don't even agree on what the purpose of the clause is. Now, I gave you the history of one approach, which at the moment only Justice Thomas has adopted, which is that the Federal Establishment Clause only prevents the federal government from interfering with state churches, and there's really no limit. There's another test, which might be called the endorsement test, where Congress can't be seen to endorse one religion over the other. There's another test called the coercion test, where they say they can't coerce you to participate in religion. You know, for example, you can't force someone to stand up for a prayer, right? There's something called the Lemon test, which is in your reading. The Lemon test says that you can't have excessive entanglement with religion, whatever the hell that means. There's another test, which is the McCreary County test, where you look at what a reasonable person would observe of a religious display. You have another test, which involves history, right? Can you start a city council meeting with prayer? Well, if there's a tradition of doing that, you can have it. Can you have In God We Trust on currency? Well, it's been there forever, so I guess it's fine. If you sense that I'm frustrated, I am. There's like 5 or 6 different tests for the Establishment Clause, and the court applies them inconsistently from across the board. Over the last 3 decades, there's no single test for the Establishment Clause. Indeed, just last week, the court granted a case involving a public display of a cross in Maryland. It was put up there shortly after World War I. Was it I think World War I. It's a battle cross to honor people killed in the war. And it's been up there for like, what, 100 years or so, right? 90 years. And no one's complained about it until fairly recently. And one of the questions the court accepted is, what test should we apply, right? Do we apply Lemon? Do we apply history? Which test are we going to apply? So my hope is that now there'll be a majority of the court that actually says, here's the test, right? Here's the test for the Establishment Clause. Now, I only assigned one Establishment Clause case today. There's another one for your last class, which is the travel ban case. The majority didn't think that the Establishment Clause was even relevant, but the dissent from Justice Sotomayor found that the travel ban affected an establishment of religion, in that the executive order, the travel ban, showed a disfavor of Islam. So you'll get a very good summary of the current state of Establishment Clause case law in Justice Sotomayor's dissent in the Hawaii against Trump case. So you'll get a little bit more of that next week, so I put it all at the end of the semester. I'm on the fence of putting in the casebook. I still don't know. I think it might. I thought it was bigger than not. Who said no?
Oh, yeah, it's big.
The travel ban case? Well, we take stuff out, but I think Randy said don't put the travel ban case in. I was on the fence, and I think I agree with him. It's like 30. No, but it can. Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, I'm leaning no, but you still have in your little supplement, so you can read it. You're welcome. Thank you. All right. So the upshot is there's a lot of different tests for the Establishment Clause. I gave you one case to read, but there really should have been 2, and I did this for your benefit, involving the 10 Commandments. Right? So there were 2. Do I have the pictures up here? I don't have the other one. It's somewhere. Right? I got the picture. So has anyone ever been to the Texas Capitol? Right? Yeah? And you've seen the huge display of the 10 Commandments at the Texas Capitol? It's right between the back of the Capitol and the Supreme Court of Texas. It's right in the backside. It's still there. But the one in McCreary County, Kentucky, is not still there. I have a picture of it. It's huge. It's like 6 feet tall. I think I have a picture with me next to it. Yeah, it's a younger me.
I was looking at the height of the
Yeah.
stone.
But it's about 6 feet tall. I think I took that my first year of teaching when I first got here. Yeah. You guys have aged me well. Didn't have glasses. You know, these gray hairs, they come in. Yeah. So it's huge, right? It's like 6.5 feet tall. It's humongous. And if you look at it, it's kind of weird, right? So they have these 2 tablets up there with basically gibberish script on it. No one knows what they actually say. It's basically gibberish. Then you have Stars of David and this sort of, what's the symbol? I think it's Cairo. It's a symbol of Christ. I can't remember the exact name of it. Yeah, is it Cairo? Yeah, it's a symbol of Christ. And then you have the American flag. And then, if you ever go to the Texas Capitol, there is a wide range of monuments, and they're completely random. And I think it was Justice Souter in the sense that there's no common theme of the Texas monuments. And I think there is. It's Buc-ee's, right? If you go to Buc-ee's, all the stuff that's there, it's all in one place. So go to Buc-ee's, and you'll get Texas. That's when I brought my parents to Buc-ee's, said, oh, this is what you're talking about. So you have the Texas monument, which is still there. And this is the one from the ACLU, from Mercury County, Kentucky. It's no longer there, right? So how can it be, my friends, that this huge 7-foot-tall statue in Austin, it's been there for like half a century, is still standing there? By the way, Governor Abbott argued this case with the Supreme Court. He did very well, and at the end, Justice Stevens was presiding because Justice Rehnquist was very sick, and Abbott made some very comments. What was he? He said something like, you don't have to stand here to do a good job, because he was in the wheelchair. It was very sweet, because he was actually arguing from the podium in his wheelchair, and Stevens was like, you don't have to stand here to make a good argument. It was really well done. I like that. But then Attorney General Abbott argued the case. So why is one here and one's not? The answer is Justice Breyer. Justice Breyer was in the majority in both McCreary County and Van Orden v. Perry. He voted to say that the Texas monument can stay, but the Kentucky one has to go. Why? I'll try to explain. So the first thing we have to know about the McCreary County case is that there wasn't one display, but there were three. There were three iterations of the display. Okay? The first iteration of the display was a representation of the Ten Commandments, the King James versions, okay, in isolation, right? It was just the Ten Commandments. Then you have the second version of the display. They got some bad legal advice. They put up a second display with the Ten Commandments surrounded by other religious messages, suggesting very strongly that this was a religious display. That's why it was there. And then the third one, they got some good legal advice, where they put the Ten Commandments up next to things like the Declaration of Independence and, the Bill of Rights and other sort of foundational texts, saying, look, this is the Ten Commandments here among other very important aspects of American law, right? Because, indeed, the Ten Commandments did serve a central place in Western civilization and in the giving of our law. And the case goes to the Supreme Court with the Texas case. Now, at the Supreme Court, if you've ever been, there's, in the main chamber, these sculptures called a relief around the perimeter of the room. And they have these very famous lawgivers. And one of the representations is they have actually Moses holding the Ten Commandments, the tablets, in the Supreme Court chamber. And throughout the Supreme Court chamber, they have these little tablets with the numbers 1 through 10. They're not the Bill of Rights, they're the Ten Commandments. By the way, there's actually a representation of Muhammad in the Supreme Court. And it was actually a fatwa years ago saying that's fine, because it was a movement trying to get it taken down. It's up there if you look. It's there. They don't make a big fuss about it, but it's there. So going back to the Ten Commandments, the majority opinion in McCreary County by Justice Souter, he uses what could be called the reasonable observer standard, right? How would a reasonable observer who views this display understand it, right? Is this about a secular, non-religious purpose, or is this about a religious purpose? And he says that a reasonable observer who understood the history, the three sequences, the three iterations of the policy, right? Were a reasonable observer to see these three iterations of the policy, he would understand that this was designed not to focus on the giving of law and the importance of the Ten Commandments to Western civilization. Rather, it was designed to endorse religion, not just endorse religion, a particular faith, the King James Version of the Ten Commandments. And by applying this reasonable observer test, the court found, 5-4 vote, that the Kentucky display was unconstitutional. And Justice Breyer joined that majority opinion. But then you have the Texas case, right? And the Texas case came out differently. Why? Justice Breyer. So first off, the reason why the monument was put there in Texas wasn't the same sort of purpose. In fact, it was donated by the Fraternal Order of the Eagles, which is just like a fraternal group. And in truth, this became a popular thing after the Ten Commandments movie. That the Eagles started giving out Ten Commandment statues across the country to promote the Charlton Heston movie, right? We've all seen it, right? Da, 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 right? The Charlton Heston movie. So it didn't have the same sort of religious purpose behind it. But also, Justice Breyer made a very big fuss about one aspect of the history. The ACLU challenged the Kentucky display immediately, right after it was put up. In contrast, the Texas monument had been on the grounds of the Capitol for like 40 or 50 years. And no one seemed to complain until some guy complained. And it had been there for a long time. And the court and Breyer found that, you know, it's a close call. But he found it was constitutional. And he also said it would be very socially disruptive to have to rip up these Ten Commandment monuments off the grounds and would cause social discord. And Justice Breyer cares a lot about that, about having people happy and not fighting. So he would leave in place the Texas monument, which is still there to this day. You can see me saying next to it. But he would eliminate the McCreary County, Kentucky one. Okay? Okay, questions on McCreary County or town of, or I gave the next case one I gave, or Van Orden v. Perry. Now, the reason why, again, I think this case law is in flux is that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was in the majority in McCreary County. She was then replaced by Justice Alito, sensing a pattern. We've discussed this before. And there was a case a couple years ago called Town of Greece versus Galloway. Greece is in upstate New York. And in Town of Greece, you had a fact pattern like this. Before a city council meeting, a prayer was read. The city council invited someone to give a prayer. And it turns out they only invited people of Christian faith to give the prayer. And there the court found that it was constitutional. That there's a long-standing practice of giving prayer before meetings. In fact, the very first Congress, one of the first things they did was they had a chaplain hired who would read a prayer before Congress began. And to this day, every session of Congress begins with a prayer. Now, there are other cases saying that you can have a non-secular prayer, right? Just a general, our Father, God, whatever, without talking about Jesus. But I think the court's moving away from that because a lot of the prayers in Town of Greece were quite religious, and they made references to Christ and the resurrection and the like during Easter. So I suspect that's probably the direction the court's headed. And if you had to ask me in the Maryland cross case I just granted a week ago, the court's probably going to hold that the cross is valid, and they're probably going to adopt the historical test and jettison the lemon test once and for all. In fact, the Justice Scalia bobblehead in my office, if you ever look at it, it has a picture of a lemon with a pencil through it. Because Justice Scalia wrote this great dissent saying that all these justices put their pencils to the lemon test, but it's still alive. It's like this creeping ghoul in the cemetery comes up and scares you at night. And I think they'll finally bury the lemon test once and for all. Okay. Questions on the Establishment Clause? Yeah, Michelle. I know that was fast. I'm sorry.
You named 5 tests, and I got 3 of them.
Oh my goodness.
Endorsement, limit, historical.
So there's endorsement, the endorsement test, the coercion test, the reasonable observer test, the lemon test. There's a historical test from Town of Greece. Again, I don't expect you to know all 5 of these, but just know, they put their pens down real quick, right? But know they exist, and this doctrine's a complete mess. Which is why I think the Maryland case will probably say, here's our test, and we're sticking to it. And it's going to be a historical test, because the other tests are simply unworkable. Mia, was your hand up also?
Yes, sir. Thanks. So in Van Orden, was it the historical test?
Oh my goodness. The Van Orden was we got Breyer and you didn't. It's not a well-reasoned decision. You can read it. It's in your book. It's basically saying that there's no religious purpose behind it. It's been there for decades. Maybe it's reasonable observer. I don't know how to characterize it. Again, because Rehnquist thinks all this stuff is bogus anyway, that the entire doctrine doesn't really matter. But again, I don't want you to twist yourselves up trying to figure out this test or that test. It's such an incoherent doctrine. The court never applies it consistently. I mean, you have cases involving, there's another case involving a playground, Trinity Lutheran, where a church had a daycare. And the daycare wanted to get these rubber chips for the playground. You know these things? The kids don't crack their skulls, right? They chop up tires and they can put it in a playground so kids don't break their skulls. So the state would give out these grants for rubber chips, but they wouldn't give it to this one daycare because it was associated with a church. And the court said you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. You can't deny some benefits to a group because they're a church. They have other cases involving funding of scholarships, right? Can you have a state scholarship funding at a religious college? Yes. But you can't have it funding a major in divinity, right? It's these distinctions make no freaking sense. It's all over the place. It's an incoherent doctrine. I hate it all. I actually, it's the one aspect of ConLaw I actually dislike teaching because it makes no sense to me. It's completely arbitrary. Completely arbitrary. And we've had some arbitrary. I can teach Kennedy better than I can teach Establishment Clause. Kennedy, there's something there, dignity. There's something here. It's like 18 different tests. Okay. What else? Your notes today are going to suck, I know. I apologize. And I had to lecture today. There's no way I could do this by calling on people. What else? Anything else? Okay, First Amendment. Just read it. It's quick. It's a few words. Okay. I will see you guys on Monday. Thank you so much. Off to the airport.